Hello and welcome to 13 Days of Halloween, Day 3. I'm featuring So Susie stamps today as well as Altenew. And to get started to make this card, you have to just cut out a piece of masking paper or a piece of post-it paper, something that you can lay down to mask off a circled area where you're going to put your moon. Because we're going to create the background to this and the foreshadowing and everything like that first before we move on to the moon. So I'm just going to lay down a die cut here from W+9. This is a circle dies. It's one of my favorite die cut sets of nesting circles because they're all quite small and therefore it's not very expensive. I always have kind of a hard time with dies because they're super expensive and I generally only have the basics. But anyway, this is a really great set to have, although the circles are quite small. So after I finish die cutting that, I'm just going to separate the two layers here. So masking paper, the way it works is you have two layers that need to be separated. One is sticky, where you could stick onto your card, and the other one you can just toss away. And what's really cool about this is I can actually, at the end, lift off my circle here and stick it on my stamp set on the plastic part, and then I can reuse it over and over again. The next step I'm going to do is just grab a scrap piece of paper and tear it. I'm just going to hold it with my hand and put down my craft mat, and I'm going to grab some black soot ink from Tim Holtz, and I'm going to put down some ink onto the actual card. So with this, I'm just holding it in place with my hand. You could also use washi tape or anything really that would help it stay in place, but my hand is fine for now. I'm not doing anything really complicated at the moment. So you can see I did a direct to paper with the ink pad and then just filled in the areas with my blending tool. Now I have the awesome sort of grass in the moonlight look where it's black. The next part, I'm just going to take my Misty. You can use a stamp press, you can use an acrylic block. You definitely don't need the Misty to do this, as I've said in my other videos before, but my stamp press is on its last leg and I don't have any acrylic blocks anymore, so I'm just using my Misty for this. It's not necessary again. But I'm just going to use the RIP from So Susie stamps. Now, what's great about So Susie stamps is that they're sold individually, so you never have stamps that you don't want. So often when I buy a stamp set, there's so many that I don't end up using. With So Susie stamps, you don't have that issue because you just buy the individual stamps themselves. So I'm using the RIP and then two trees for this card. So I'm just going to stamp the graves over top of that background there, and I'm using the black soot ink as well. And I'm just double stamping them, and the reason why is I get an even more solid impression than before. And with the Misty, my card stays in place the entire time, so it's very easy to do. But again, you don't have to double stamp them at all. They'll work just fine by stamping them once. As you can see right now, they work just fine. I'm just going to put 3 graves. The eye is attracted to odd numbers more than even, so that's why I didn't put 4. And the reason being is that when even numbers of things happen, whether it's in sparkles or stamps or whatever, the brain tries to sort them. And so that's apparently why it is easier on the eyes to have an uneven amount of things. Alright, so I'm just going to go in and do a little bit more stamping here, and though that's going to be followed by the 2 trees. I originally, when I made this card, I filmed it and it didn't work, so I'm actually refilming this card. And originally what I had done was I masked off the graves and then stamped the tree over top. That works nicely as well, but I was too lazy to do that in this one, and actually I forgot to do it. So I just made sure that I stuck the tree trunks in between so they didn't cover up any of the RIPs, and then I was fine. If you want to make it more realistic looking, cut a mask of the RIP in the grave, stick them on, and stamp your trees, and that will work just as well. And then you also don't have to worry about covering those RIPs by accident if you didn't space them out appropriately, or whatever the case may be. So I'm using 2 trees. These are both from So Susie stamps. These are excellent Halloween trees, and also the tree on the left could be used, of course, in winter scenes as well. So I'm just going to double stamp them once again. I'm just obsessed with this double stamping these days because it just gives it an even more solid appearance, and I just really like the way that that looks. What I don't like the way that that looks is the fact that you can see the bottoms of the graves in the black grass there. So I'm just going to go in and fix that. So I'm just going in with my blending tool carefully, not to screw up my mask that I did here, and I'm just helping the graves, I guess you could say, blend into the grass so it looks like one solid image. And most people actually wouldn't notice that that's actually happening if you're giving the card to somebody, but I notice it and it drives me crazy. So now it looks a little bit better than it did before. Just going to clean off my area here and get started on the next step of the card. Alright, now for creating the background, I had originally intended on purchasing the Wilted Violet, which is the new color from Tim Holtz. Thought that would look really cool, but I hadn't done that yet, so I just used the Dusty Concord purple. And I just went in and I went from the edges and worked my way in, getting lighter as I went in, so a lighter hand. I wanted to make sure that it was dark on the edges and then also lighter on towards the moon, because the moon would be radiating light in a natural scene, right? So that I wanted to make sure that I had. And overall, I love the way that it turned out. I also went in with some chipped sapphire and some black soot around the edges. It's not completely necessary, I'll definitely say that. Alright, so when that was all done, I just cleaned up my area here and removed the mask, so now you have the moon there. And I'm going to use the To the Moon stamp from Altenew, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to stamp the different shades of the moon on here with Pumice Stone from Tim Holtz. Now, in my original card, I ended up stamping off of the paper first and then stamping the second generation onto the cardstock, and you'll see me do that when I do the second layer of the moons, because this actually turned out a lot darker than I wanted to, because I forgot to do that this time. So for the second one, I put it on, picked it up with my Misty, and then I just grabbed a scrap piece of paper, stamped it on there first, and then I stamped it onto my card itself to give it a little bit more of a faded look. And what that gave me was the 3 different shades of the moon using one ink pad. So I'm just going in with a makeup sponge, and I am just adding a little bit of gray, sort of some mist over the moon, just to blend in that really dark moon that ended up happening there. And I also went over the RIPs so that they weren't so vibrant white, because that wouldn't be realistic in this type of scene. Now, you have to make sure that your background is all dry at this point. So grab a heating tool, make sure that it's dry, or you're going to have an absolute disaster with this Happy Haunting stamp. So I'm stamping it down with some Versamark ink, and I'm going to be embossing it using white embossing powder. But again, make sure your background is completely dry. Even after I made sure that it was dry, I still had some issues with some sticking, but I ended up fixing it by just wiping off all the embossing powder, heat drying it one more time, and then restamping it with the Versamark ink and adding my embossing powder. So you'll see this was actually my first attempt, how much ink or how much of the powder actually stayed on the card, and then I just edited out the rest just to show you. So yeah, just make sure that your background's dry, because the paper is quite saturated. You've added a ton of ink onto it. So just apply your heat tool to add the Happy Haunting onto the card. And I love the way that the white just really stands out against the entire card and onto that black background. And it also covers up the fact that you can kind of see the bottom of those graves in the black ink, which drove me insane. Anyway, I took a piece of 11 by 4 1/4 black cardstock from Simon Says Stamp and scored it at 5.5 inches. To create a top folding card, and I'm just adding my card panel using some Tombow Mono liquid adhesive onto that card, so now it has a nice black frame around the entire card. The only thing with this though is you either have to use a white gel pen when writing your card, or you have to add a card panel in the inside of the card in white so that you can write a Halloween card to someone, as the inside's obviously black at the moment. Alright, so that's the end of today's card tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Here is a final look at the original card that I had made. And all the supplies used are linked to below in the video description or on my blog. Here you're welcome to click to visit my blog here at the top. You can click on the right to subscribe, or click on that moving video there to see the video from the day before from my favorite things. Thank you so much for tuning into the Halloween series, and I hope to see you again soon.